Hello everyone, I'm Sylvia from Fairlightarot. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to have a look at Mirror or Yin and Yang decks, a VR to Meredith from the Oasis Spiritual Empowerment Tarot. If you haven't watched part 1 of these videos, we're going to have a look at decks that are very similar from an aesthetic point of view, but when you get to know them, you will see that they actually share very, very different energies. So it was a very long video and I had to split it in two because I didn't want to go on for hours. And I also realized that I had even more decks that I wanted to be in this category. So if, for example, today we're going to have a look at these decks. So this one is the Vindoor deck by Leah and this is the Line Strider Tarot deck by Shiolo Thompson. These two decks are similar to me in the sense that they have the same use of absence and presence when it comes to the figures, the symbols, the filling the cards with images and the absence of the images themselves. I think that they coincidentally pair up really well. So Shiolo Thompson is also the author of a couple of oracle decks. One that comes to mind is the Winter Seer Oracle deck, which actually pairs really, really well with the Vindoor deck, because the Vindoor deck has that kind of airy energy that I really, really appreciate. If you don't know the story, the Vindoor deck has been conceived and created by Leah Panthea whilst she was having this introspective time in Iceland. And so it's very easy to identify the clash between the two energies of fire and ice, which are typical of that country. And if you watch my channel, you will know that I absolutely love traveling. Iceland is one of my favorite places in the world because of these contrasts. So if you go in winter, for example, it's the land of glaciers. If you go in summer, it's the land of the really green pastures and the striking contrast between the black of the rock of the mountains and the volcanic rocks and the green of the scenery. It's one of the countries that has the highest volcanic activity on Earth. As a matter of fact, I think even when I was there, there was a volcanic activity to the point that I think my flight was the last one to leave, that was allowed to leave, because there was going to be a massive cloud, you know, as it happens, and they were just grounding all the other flights. I just literally made it out by a sheer matter of minutes. Not that I wouldn't mind it, because honestly, I thought to myself, oh, you know, I didn't look for it. I didn't want to stay longer, but I actually don't mind the idea of spending another couple of weeks in here. So to me, this deck is magnificent. It's the first edition. The second edition is borderless. The first edition is out of print. The second one still has a few, you can find a few shops still reselling it. But when it comes to the Line Strider, I think that where the similarities are in the use, as I said, to the use of absence and presence of work in the cards, I think that the way in which you relate to this deck is slightly different. So the Vindoor deck will definitely give you its own interpretation of this clash, of this confrontation between the two really, really powerful energies, whereas the Line Strider is actually very intuitive deck. It feels like the Vindoor is leading you, the Line Strider is leaving you, it's letting you decide where to go, what to do, how to read, how to interpret the cards, what kind of thoughts to conceive when you look at the cards. And you will see that in a way the Vindoor deck is more peepish, I would say, than the Line Strider. Line Strider may have a lot more references to the meaning of the cards, even though I would say that Vindoor does as well. But again, it's a different kind of suggestion, it's a different kind of association, it's a different kind of reaction that I have while looking at the cards themselves. And as I said before, this kind of style from Scholl is very, very easy to identify. So she's also, so this is the Line Strider, but there's another tarot deck. And then I think there's two. I think the Hedrick Botanical Oracle is also by the same author. And I would love to see how the Hedrick Botanical would pair up, for example, with the Vindur deck, because I believe in mixing and matching. I don't always think that only because two decks, and a tarot and an oracle, have been produced by the same author, they should necessarily pair well together. Most of the time aesthetically they do, but aesthetics is, as you will know, not necessarily something that drives me whenever I choose two decks. I really love these two decks together. It's ironic, but because the energies are, to me, they look like they're complementing each other, it makes me feel like it's a very good kind of combination. So I really like the fact that we've got the Queen of Swords here and the King of Swords here. And I can definitely feel the difference in the energies of these two decks. However, I do believe that they actually look really, really good together. So this is the Line Strider Tarot and this is the Vindur deck. The next two decks I want to show you are from the same author, Alessandro Colucci. I think he's Argentinian. They're both being published by Lo Scarabeo. And this is Tarot Z, this is a special edition, and this is Tarot V. Now, these two decks, I have not seen them a lot, to be honest. And most of the time, what I do see is Tarot Z. So Z stands for zombies, as you can imagine, and V stands for vampires. They're very similar decks, and within the scope of this tag, of course, I'm talking about similarities between artwork. But then again, there are substantial differences when it comes to the energies of these two decks, and that is something that I really want to explain, because these two decks are probably two of my favorite decks. But for different reasons. So let's have a look. So again, I feel like I compare these two and try and finding the similarities first. So as you can tell, the artwork is, I would say these two cards, for example, could belong to the same deck. And you will see it is the case for practically all of the cards. Obviously, we're facing two different kind of supernatural phenomena. So in one deck, we're looking at zombies. In another deck, we're looking at vampires, fair enough. But they do have the same kind of art style in such a way that sometimes even zombies can look like vampires and vice versa. There is that kind of idea that they're both set in this dystopian future in which humanity has been fighting but has lost the battle against, you know, what is non-human, so what is supernatural. And there still is that kind of sense of resilience that comes from both of the decks. But then again, when looking at color palette and aesthetics and this kind of, you know, setting, so where the story is set, what the premises of the decks are, well, once you exhaust these features, then you will see that these two decks have actually a different kind of energy. And to me, this is very clear when you take a step away from the traditional interpretation of the cards. And one thing that I'm very grateful for is the fact that, for example, you don't have the titles of the cards. You have the number and then you have a symbol to signify the element of the suits. This to me is very conducive of a very intuitive kind of reading. And I'm very grateful for that, because this way I don't lose track of what I'm seeing in the cards. So these cards will obviously have different depictions of the traditional RWS. They are loosely based on RWS, but if you read the guidebook, and again, I know I keep on saying it, but please read the guidebooks. I've seen someone on YouTube saying that they don't need to read the guidebooks. I'm not saying you need to. I'm sure you know tarot very well. However, this person in particular has missed out on not reading the guidebooks of these two tarot decks. She's missed out on a lot of information. I know that Los Carabeo has got a bad name because most of the time when it's not special editions especially, you will see that there's the little white book and there's just one sentence for each and every card, which is very annoying because obviously you go, well, I knew that. What I want to know is the creative process, what the thoughts of the artists were when they created, when they chose a specific image to represent that specific card. So this is the Six of Cups, for example. And to me, that is so powerful because at first I look at it and I think, okay, well, what is the meaning of the Six of Cards? Yeah, okay, nostalgia. Okay, nostalgia for a time in the past in which there were not as many trouble, not as many anxieties as I can have now. And therefore, it seems to me like looking back would eventually remind me of a simpler time, or a time in which I was happier. However, this card will also, if you look into it, you see that it says memento mori. So memento mori is a Latin sentence that says, remember that you have to die. And so in the way in which this character is reminding us, so she's already gone to the other side, but she is reminding us that everything that is in the past, and it looks adulterated, it looks pure, it looks like everything was perfect. Don't forget that you had to die back in the past, you will still have to die now, and it's something that is in the future, that pertains to the future of every single human being. So remember that I was like you in the past. It seems like the figure is telling us, and you will be like me in the future. And it's absolutely fantastic because in my own experience as a traveler, for example, I remember there is a church in Rome. It's called a church, colloquially called the Church of the Bones. And it's literally just decorations are made out of actual human bones. And there's a sentence in which, on the ark that is preceding the entry to this church, and it says, remember that we are what one way you will be, and we were what you are now. So it's this continuum that is established between the past and the present that is so very typical of this card, the Six of Cups. You will miss out on all this information if you would think only of the traditional RWS meaning of this card. And same, the same goes for every other card. And I really do believe that there needs to be this kind of, not necessarily research onto these decks, because if you don't have time, I completely understand. We all work, we all have, our lives and everything. We don't necessarily always have time to do studying on the decks. But there is so much that can be seen in these cards and can be appreciated, and I can assure you that this way you will have a completely different experience, and this is where you will start seeing these two decks in a different way. So personally, I believe that the Tarot V, so this one is the one of the vampires, is slightly less deep. Let's put it this way, because I don't want to use any kind of negative adjectives. I feel that the Tarot Z is deeper, the Tarot V is more superficial. I believe that whether that's related to iconography or not, it's a different story. Are vampires more superficial? And superficial is a bad word. Let me find something else. When I talk about more on the surface, to me is more about appearances. Vampires will be focusing on, in the traditional depiction of vampires, I'm not talking about what the actual vampire represents or stands for, but you will see them dressed in really luscious dresses. It is referred often to a wealth of of appearances that you don't see, whereas, for example, a zombie is often dressed in rags. It's rotting. You see the difference? So vampires can be seductive, they can be beautiful, they can be gorgeous, they can be, actually, as a matter of fact, there is a whole literature. If you start looking at movie productions, for example, I don't know, Interview with the Vampire, which is one of my favorite movies when it comes to vampires, that shows exactly what I mean. And I believe that there's a few scenes here in the tarot that actually are kind of, you know, transpositions from scenes of the movie. It shows you vampires in their opulence, okay, in their abundance of wealth, whereas you can tell that zombies are more, well, zombies are what they are. It's rotting human flesh. It's a person that used to be alive, and now it's neither here nor there. They're not alive, they're not dead. And they're not very, so this is what I mean. This looks to me like Brad Pitt, you know, in Interview with the Vampire. Whereas when we look at zombies, what we can feel is that kind of depth. So where vampires reflect on what's superficial, what's appearances, zombies will reflect on what's beyond that, what's deeper than that. And these two decks do exactly that to me. So I use them in my practice whenever I want to have a reflection of what's around me, and whenever I have a reflection on what's beyond, what's behind, what's around me. Does it make sense? I hope it does. I really love both of these decks. I just use them in a different way. By the way, whenever I teach tarot, I often use these two decks because of directionality. Well, obviously, thankfully, this card will show that. So this is the Death card in the Tarot Z. That to me is very, very deep. It's the sense of death is actually even looking outside of the frame. Death is not concerned by human beings. Death is just doing its work. And you can see that because they're still dragging this person, this human that has died or is in the process of dying. And death is taking this human, and they only require one hand, and they're actually grabbing the face of this person. There is so little concern for humanity in this card. And yet death is showing us that with this disregard and non-concern about humanity is still triumphant. And it's still in the directionality of the card, in which is showing us that it's looking outside of the frame, it's actually moving. It's almost as if it was a fleeting passing, because fleeting is the nature of death. And I really do appreciate that. I don't think that there's as many cards with such a deeper meaning in Tarot V as well. And I'm not expecting it to be, in the sense that I don't necessarily need it to be as deep or as reflective as Tarot Z is. So this is Tarot V and this is Tarot Z, both by the same creator, Alejandro Colucci. So these two decks, to me, they're super fun because, so one is the Zombie Tarot, which is quite famous, I think. I've seen it everywhere. And this is the Omegaland Tarot deck and card game. The reason why I'm showing them together in this tag is because every single time I think of the Omegaland, I don't know why, but I always think about The Walking Dead. And I haven't watched the show, I know I should, but when I refer to The Walking Dead, I actually refer to the video game, because I played all of the episodes, and actually more than once. And I really like it, and I think it's got the same kind of artwork and the same color palette. So every time I see the Omegaland, I immediately think of The Walking Dead, and by association, I immediately think of the Zombie Tarot, because The Walking Dead is some kind of an Omegaland with zombies. So, and there are no zombies in the Omegaland. That's the funny thing, that I don't know why I always associate, you know, The Walking Dead and the zombie part with the Omegaland. But the Omegaland is still set in this dystopian kind of future in which, you know, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong, and humanity needs to defend themselves from a number of things that want them dead. So let's have a look, because I do feel that these two decks also share a very similar artwork, very similar color palette. The theme is very similar, but they do have two completely different kind of energies. Now, if you're familiar with the Omegaland also is a card game. So you will have all these cards in which, on the one hand, they tell you the meanings of the majors. At the same time, they will give instructions on how to use the cards for the card game. So the Omegaland, well, it's been published by US Games. However, this deck is now out of print. I edged mine. I didn't used to like edging US Games cardstock, but this one I think came out pretty well. So let's have a look. I really do believe that these two have very, very similar kind of colors. You'll see a lot of, you know, zombies, obviously, in the zombie tarot. I think that they have in common is the color palette, the fact that they both look like they're being antiqued. So they both look like kind of antique kind of decks. The cardstock of the zombie tarot, for example, looks like it's definitely being, you know, the borders look a bit yellow to me. And that's the same kind of effect that you can find on the borders of the Omegaland. You know, there's clearly destruction, there's clearly abandonment of anything that makes us human, because they all talk about survivors. But this is where I believe that the two decks actually take two different paths. So I personally think that the zombie tarot is tongue-in-cheek. Every single card is tongue-in-cheek, in the sense that it really takes this kind of humor to a whole nother level. And you know, it tells you that yes, we live in a world that is full of zombies, but there are so many elements that are so whimsical in the cards that it really invites you to get out of that kind of really oppressive atmosphere of doom and gloom and of despair. And in a way, it stops being a survivor kind of deck, because, you know, it goes beyond that by showing you the whimsical and funny side of this kind of dystopian future or catastrophe. At the same time, it gives you the idea that perhaps you shouldn't take yourself too seriously. Whereas the Omegaland, I think it stops short of doing that. In the Omegaland, I don't see the same kind of humor. I see that there's a lot of the same kind of representations in the cards. But Five of Wands to me doesn't show any kind of human-related element. Whereas, for example, this Knight of Hazards is all about haha. It's all about laughing. It's all about, you know, seeing the funny side of things. The Omegaland is the kind of deck that will definitely show you what could become, what could happen. And it's not a negative deck, don't get me wrong. It's definitely not. It's got that kind of powerful sense of survival that shows how much strength humanity can have when we need to. But I think that it stops there. Whereas what I really, really do appreciate about the zombie tarot is the fact that it actually goes beyond that. And as I said before, it's something that, you know, it reminds you that you can still laugh. I don't feel like laughing. Let's put it in a very simple way. I definitely don't feel like laughing whenever I use the Omegaland. Whereas the zombie tarot definitely bring a smile to my face every time I look at the cards. Even though, you know, it's actually even worse, because when it comes to elements, you will see that the Omegaland is all about survival, but the Zombieland, there's not much hope for surviving. There's some kind of an integration between the alive and the dead. But there you go, like in this example. But it doesn't really give you much hope for what's to come if something like that will eventuate. I really like these two together. I think it's becoming some kind of a test whether I like these two decks together, because to me it feels like they do share the same aesthetics, but they have complementary energies. So this is the Zombie Tarot and this is the Omegaland Tarot. So in this case, these two decks are actually almost, I would say, 90% the same. It's by the same author, so it's the Tarot of the Holy Spectrum. However, this is the original edition second print, and this is the Infinity edition. There's also an additional print of the original edition, and there's also a Color Me edition. So they're, as you can imagine, they are almost the same. However, they have two completely different kind of energies, and let's see why. So the Infinity edition is, I think it might be the most recent one, although perhaps the Color Me edition actually is the most recent one, whereas the original edition came out a few years ago. These two decks, I just really love them, even reading together. And this has become a bit of a trial for me to see whether two decks indeed have completely different energies, and whether these two energies are complementing each other, whereas the fact that they're very similar aesthetically means that it's also a combo that is pleasing to the eye. So as you can see, there's a slight difference in the saturation of the colors. So the Infinity edition, because it's a glossy, as you can see, it's a glossy cardstock, whereas the original edition has a very matte kind of cardstock. It's the kind of matte that is very similar to a rose petal kind of finish. However, it does not have the negative, let's say, side of the rose petal cardstock, because the cards don't actually come back together. So my apologies if there's noises coming out from outdoors, because my cat has decided that he doesn't know whether he wants to stay outside or he wants to stay inside. If you have cats, you will know what I mean. So these two decks are amazing. I really love the artwork. Now the artwork is very similar. However, when you look at the subtle differences in, as I said before, the saturation of the colors, and also there's a couple of differences. For example, the Ten of Swords is, and also has a different kind of configuration. That's amazing that it shows the two figures in exactly the same position. So this is the Four of Pentacles and this is the Four of Swords. And we do have the sense of abandonment in both of these cards. And it looks to me like the Four of Swords, the figure in the Four of Swords is probably keeping the sword close to their chest just as much as the figure on the Four of Pentacles is hoarding, you know, is kind of keeping the wealth close to their chest as well. When it comes to the energies though, I feel like these two are rather different. This deck, to me, once more, feels like it's a very grounding kind of deck. It's a deck that, you know, it really asks you to be aware in the moment. Whereas the Infinity edition, and I don't know whether that's the result of the glosses or the result of the fact that the colors are more saturated. It can also be the fact that, for example, the hair, I know it's a small detail, but the hair in all of the characters in the Infinity edition is a much more vibrant color. In some cases, is actually a like a fluo color. And this way, this one is really grounding me. This one is actually taking me to a different dimension. It's, see what I mean with the hair. So it's really lifting me up. Perhaps these two decks, because of this, I feel like using them under different circumstances. I feel like pairing them up with different kind of oracle decks to get that kind of a bridge between the meanings of the cards of the tarot and the keywords in the oracle. Again, I wish the author would create an oracle deck as well, because I really do believe that it would be really beautiful to see how the oracle would pair up with the two decks. I feel like there's a lot of work to be done that can be done. It is encouraging and inducive to a complete kind of work. Using these two, not necessarily in the same spread, for example, but I would definitely use these two sequentially. So I would definitely start with the original to give me that kind of grounding that I need, and that I would expand in introspection and the kind of meditation that is induced by this deck in particular. And I really, really like them together. So this is the, both of them are the Tarot of the Holy Spectrum, but this is the original edition, second printing, and this is the Infinity edition. And these two decks to me are very, very similar. I was hesitating whether to display them into this deck because, as you can remember, the theme of this deck is about decks that are very similar when it comes to the aesthetics of the cards, but once you get to know them and you use them, you will feel that they actually have different energies. I think that it took me a while to understand. I always felt that there was a difference between these two decks, obvious, apart from the obvious ones when it comes to artwork, etc. But I could not really put my finger on it until I started looking at the Madame Lydia tarot in a different way. But let's have a look. So we're talking about the Hush tarot and the Madame Lydia Villamina's tarot of monsters, the macabre, and autumn scenes. I believe that, so this deck, I call it the Lydia Tarot, sorry about that, it's so much easier because it's a long title, and everyone does. So the Lydia Tarot is, it's technically out of print, but sometimes Bettelin, she will actually put it on sale, some more copy on sale in our shop. So if you don't have it and you really want it, don't despair, because you might be able to snatch a copy, and I will definitely make sure to put the website in the description box below so that you can, you can check every now and then whether it's becoming available again. And also I do recommend to follow her page on Instagram, because she would eventually say when she's releasing new copies for sale. Now you will see that these two decks are very, very similar when it comes to color palette, when it comes to art style, and also when it comes to a first glance, also when it comes to energies. But we'll have a look at why I think that they're actually different in the end. First of all, can show you that they're both a really nice matte finish. They don't have the same size. The backs are very similar as well, as you can tell. So the Madame Lydia tarot is more like a standard shape and size, whereas the Hush tarot, as you can tell, it's slightly shorter and slightly wider. To me, this is the standard size. This is more towards some kind of a oracle size deck, but it's not as bad. I can still shuffle it, riffle shuffle it. So let's have a look. First of all, the similarities, as I said before, very similar color palette. Whoops. Very, very similar artwork. These two decks have that kind of sense of decadence. I think that that's where it stops though, because the decadence of the Hush tarot is a decadence that is very much into that kind of cycle of nature. So it's the decadence of what's rotting, and it's a whenever you think about rotting, think about a fruit, for example, that it's ripe and then it's overripe and then it starts rotting, and in some cases you can actually tell from the smell. It's a very sugary, overly sweet kind of smell, and it also, you will see that in many of the cards, that there is that kind of element of rotting Whereas I believe that in the Madame Lydia, it's a kind of a snapshot in time in which you cannot really feel the evolution. So the Ash Tarot will give you that kind of energy that is transformation related, whereas the Lydia Tarot is giving you that kind of energy that is static. Please understand that I don't mean anything negative or positive whenever I talk about evolving energy or static energy. It's just a different energy, that's all. And as such, you can actually use these two decks together. I really like to pair these two with an oracle, like a botanical oracle. I have just recently acquired a magical botanical oracle by Los Carabel. And these three go really, really well together. It's a match made in heaven. And I really feel like there's this encouragement to look at rotting nature as a stage of the many stages you have to go through to achieve transformation, whereas the Madame Lydia Tarot really shows you a moment in time in which there is this kind of grounding, and it shows you the decadence. Probably not related to nature as much as related to human nature, which I really appreciate, because there is this kind of there's always this association of humanity with one small detail that would take you away from it, one small detail that may necessarily not belong to a human elements, but they can be associated with animal energy, for example, as well, or natural energies. The use of the mask, for example, is coadjuvating that, it's helping that expand. So, for example, in this card, this is the Temperance card, and I really like the fact that it looks, at first look, what is it? It's just a Flemish painting, right? It really looks like one of those Flemish paintings we're so used to. However, if you look closer, you will see that there are elements of decay and rot in the figure, in the flesh, for example, which is very important. But to me, when the rotting and the decay in the hush lead you to a different stage, in the Madame Lydia is actually expressing that static energy that really keeps you on the card. It really keeps you there. There's also an element of perhaps a bit of spookiness in the Madame Lydia Tarot, which is intentional, by the way. This looks like a Caravaggio painting, of course, and it does have that kind of richness of abundance that you see in all of Caravaggio's painting. However, because there is a kind of a different sepia tone associated with it, there is that kind of presence of decay that you would not see in Caravaggio's paintings. And again, in the Devil card, for example. So again, while the Hash Tarot will take you on a journey outside of yourself, the Madame Lydia's will take you on a journey as well, but it's a journey of introspection. So it's not outside of yourself, it's actually inside yourself. I really love that there's a lot of curated art in the Madame Lydia Tarot, but always with that element of quirkiness that you expect from this deck. So this is the Madame Lydia Tarot, and this is the Hash Tarot. So the last two decks are oracle decks, they're not tarot decks. And I really wanted to show you that even when it comes to oracle decks, you can still have that kind of similarities when it comes to artwork, perhaps, or color palettes, or theme even, but they can be used in different ways because they actually embodies two different types of energies. And in this case, I'm going to show you the Oasis Oracle by Andrea One, and the Reclaim Oracle by, this is by Little Darkness, actually. Yes, Little Darkness. I think that the Reclaim Oracle is quite popular. I think this is the 3rd edition. It's a very popular deck because it's very often, I see it used very often for shadow work, whenever you do this kind of introspective kind of work. And I actually hesitated in in buying this deck for a long time because I had the Oasis, and the Oasis is doing a very similar kind of work for me. However, what I did was I actually borrowed this deck, the Reclaim Oracle, from a friend for a while, and I started using it. I started looking into it, and I realized that no matter the way it is used by others, to me this deck has a distinct energy from the Oasis Oracle. Let's see why. Okay, first of all, we can tell that there's this minimalist kind of style that is, it resonates between these two decks. I would say also the fact that they are bichromatic, so there's, this kind of a creamy whitish color with black, and there's this pink, like an antique rose, and the black. It's also very similar. It's a similarity and an echo between these two decks. And I really do like the fact that they have keywords. They're very, very intuitive keywords that I really, really appreciate and like. However, I would say that the similarities kind of stop there. I consider these two decks, and the way in which I feel called to use them is very physical and very mental, and I'll try and explain that. So they are both encouraging you to do a lot of shadow work. So as we've seen it before, I do accept the Jungian tradition of shadow work. So looking into the parts of yourself that are kept hidden in the darkness for now, bringing them back to light, and deciding whether you want to release them because you don't want to be in touch with them anymore, or you want to nurture them because they have not fulfilled their own purpose in your life. However, when it comes to cards in specific, and these two decks in specific, I feel like I am called to use the Reclaim Oracle whenever there's a sense of darkness in my body. So in a sense of shame in my body, something that has to be released in my body. I have a very strong connection to this deck because it feels to me like it's been helping me a lot, especially in the last few months. And it's a deck that really comes to me when I feel like I have this kind of disconnect between myself and the way I look, the way I sound, for example, the way in which I interface myself with the world and with others, the way I interact with nature around me, something very physical, very corporeal. Whereas the Oasis to me actually feels like it focuses on the mind, and I really love that. The mind card actually came to me whenever I was talking about this. So, and also the Create card is very deep for me. So I would use the Reclaim Oracle whenever I need to repair that disconnect between the way I feel and the way I look and the way in which I represent myself. But I will use the Oasis whenever I have a disconnect of the mind. Whenever I need to create something that it just doesn't come to the manifestation, whenever I need to reconnect to that meaningfulness that I feel like I have lost in my mind. The card of chaos is one of the strongest ones that I see, for example, even though it is depicted in some kind of a physical representation, because you do see the bodies here with the legs and the arms and the faces. To me, that speaks of the chaos of the mind. So it is very important to distinguish these two decks and the way in which I use them, because I don't necessarily always need a deck that will focus on the body. And I don't necessarily need a deck that focuses only on the mind. I will definitely feel like I need both of them. And they both look at that kind of disconnect that has been created for whatever reason, and they both act on it in such a way that it helps me heal. And And again, another proof that I really like and enjoy these two decks with complementary energy is that I really like to use them together as well. So this is the Reclaim Oracle and this is the Oasis Oracle, and these were the last two decks that I wanted to show you for this tag, which is Mirror or Yin and Yang decks. It was such a fun tag to show you, and thank you very much for staying with me till the end of this video. This is part 2. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really means a lot to me. More to come. Have a great day.